Okay, it's 10:35 and we always start right on time here at Beyond the Boardroom. If you were with us this morning, welcome back. We just left like 2 minutes ago. If you're just joining us, welcome, welcome. I'm Diane Michael and I am with Callan Group Communications. It's a marketing agency and I started Beyond the Boardroom with my partner and best friend, Lindsay Lombardi, who is a CAM and also has a management company and works for Dominion. If this is your first time with us, welcome. If you're returning back again, thank you for being here with us. Our goal at Beyond the Boardroom is to educate board members and CAMs in an easy way at your desk, on your mobile, while you're traveling. We provide all of the continuing education credits that you need for your 15 hours in your 2 years. I believe that your credits are due on September 30th. Lindsay will correct me if I'm wrong because she's the CAM partner on this. I'm on the marketing side. So you're going to want to be paying attention to all of our emails to make sure that you have all of your credits. And credits do take a lot of time. You know, the DBPR is a government agency, and you know they move at as best that they can with all the overflow that they have coming in. And so sometimes credits can show up very quickly and sometimes it takes a long time. We don't have control over that. Lindsay will go over more of that, but we just want you to know that we provide those courses for you for free because we have the Association Allies, the presenters that you're hearing from every second and fourth Wednesday. If you are not receiving an email from me every single week about this program, you're going to want to check your junk mail and you're going to want to add me and the email address it comes from to your safe sender list. And that way you won't miss any important information about our program. We started on the fourth Wednesday of each month, and we've already now grown to offer free education and CE credits to board members and CAMs on the second and fourth Wednesdays of each month. So mark your calendars for the next webinar Wednesday that's happening on July 8th. And we are very excited. We just partnered with Martel and Ozum to provide board member credits every month as well. And that will start in July, on July 8th. So stay tuned for that. CAMs, we will be sending you that information so that you can forward it to your board members so that they can get official credit. But a board member credit and a CAM credit cannot be done at the same time. That's the way that the DBPR has instructed us. So we'll have separate webinars for board members so that you as a board member can get your credit. And CAMs, if you would do us a favor and forward the newsletters about the board member credit to your board members, it will help them, it will help you, it will help us. Okay. Lindsay, you just want to go over a little bit about how the credits are going to work today?
Absolutely. So as soon as Eddie is done presenting and going over his evaluation, answering all of your questions, we will provide you with the link to our website. And that is where you will go to submit your first name, middle initial, last name, CAM license number, all the good information that we need, and a code word, which you'll provide at the end. So you must stay for the entire course and you must have that code word in order to get credit for today's course because, again, like Diane said, we are responsible to our vendors, association allies, and the DBPR to make sure that you stayed for the whole course in order to get credit. And that is how we were able to do that. So please make sure that you're paying attention at the end for that information. We'll like say it twice, put it in the chat, and then that'll be that. So again, after the course, we will provide you with all that information.
And just so everyone knows how it works, Zoom, like if you log in right at the end, you won't be able to see the chat. That's just how people are like, oh, I don't see it in the chat. That means you just logged on. So we're hit to the game. We're hit to the game. So as I introduce Eddie, I have enabled chat. Sorry guys about the quiz. We'll enable it this time. No, every time we have something that we are not perfect on, and we appreciate you understanding that because it's just it's it's technology, and it's, Zoom is also always updating things. So it has new settings on the back end over here this time. So if everyone will put into chat where they're coming in from, whether they're a board member or a CAM, we love to show our association allies that, and Eddie's with us, so we want to show Eddie where everyone's coming in from. So go ahead and put that into the chat while I introduce our friend Eddie with Azure. Eddie Bone began his career in pool business fresh out of college when he was recruited to join the management training program at Pool Corp, a national chain of swimming pool distributors. He spent the next 9 years learning the business side of swimming pools, product sales, construction, and maintenance. And then he moved with Pool Corp from Minneapolis to Georgia, and then ultimately to Naples, where he became a branch manager and sales center manager at SCP of Southwest Florida. You wouldn't know that he has all this experience by looking at him, because he looks so young, and but he's got decades of experience in the pool industry, which is so important to have that vantage point from all sides. At SCP, Eddie and his wife Kylie witnessed the joy and excitement a new pool and patio remodel can give homeowners and communities, and decided to open their own family business. Eddie also saw a lot of mistakes being made by contractors, a lack of communication and poor workmanship, and all those things resulting in expensive change orders for customers. And that's why Azure offers 3D renderings of every remodel or new pool, so homeowners and associations can fully visualize a project before construction starts. Over the years, Eddie and Kylie have had the opportunity to meet and work with the best swimming pool subcontractors in Southwest Florida, recruiting only the most reliable and best at their craft for their company. Eddie is a board member on the Florida Swimming Pool Association, which is an association that helps with the industry, and he has been a board member and member for a very long time. So he's also on the forefront of things that are coming down legislatively, changes to any commercial policies, things of that nature. So it's an honor to have Eddie with us this morning. Eddie, welcome.
Good morning. Thanks everybody for being here. Appreciate everybody taking time out of your day. I hate to interrupt podcasts and things like that you might be listening to today, but I'll try and make it interesting and put up some cool pictures and talk about some real life scenarios just to make everything a little bit more interesting. So I will be presenting today on commercial pool forensics, reading the clues, digging into why things happen, and ultimately, if possible, trying to prevent major repair costs and everything for everybody's swimming pool areas. So let's go ahead and get started. As Diane said, I've been in the industry quite a while. I've been on many sides of this industry, both working on the manufacturer's rep side as well as the construction side. So I get a interesting perspective when it comes to working on swimming pools and being around materials, etc. I've been out on warranty situations as a manufacturer and looked at the different installation techniques, etc., that everybody uses. So I feel like I've seen it all, but then, at least once a week, there will be something new that pops up that, I scratch my head on and try and figure out, what exactly were they trying to do here? So I was watching everybody fill in on the chat where everybody's from. We are in Estero, Florida. We're in Southwest Florida, so we service the Fort Myers, Bonita, Estero, Naples areas, as well as Bonita Beach, Fort Myers Beach, and Sanibel. So if you're in those areas, feel free to reach out. If you guys have work or need us to come and look at anything, we're happy to help. In my presentation, I may move around a little bit. I may not follow the slides exactly as they're laid out. There are a lot of photos that I'm going to show that may reference one or more parts of my presentation, so I may move around a bit. And feel free in the chat to ask questions as I go along. And then obviously we'll save some time at the end to go over any questions as well. So let's get cranking. So we're going to dive right in. First thing we're going to talk about is structural versus cosmetic cracking, the types of cracks, shrinkage cracks, settlement, structural. getting into, the different solutions when it comes to remedying cracks, because there are different solutions. Just depends on the crack width, the direction, how much is happening, and then ultimately, you know, recognizing, all right, is it an isolated incident or is it indicating something more serious like pool shell moving, etc.? And then just how ultimately we document and address issues as they come up on our own jobs. So first, I wanted to dive into some structural cracks. This was actually, I've got another photo here. This pool is a pool down in Naples that we were sent out recently just to do a small repair. You can see that the coping bricks have actually been removed out of those areas. What was showing up in the actual coping bricks before we removed them was just some movement and cracking in the grout. And what we were hired to do was to remove the existing loose coping bricks and then reinstall new coping bricks because they had bricks left over from the initial construction. So what should have been a pretty simple, straightforward job ended up being much more severe. You can see the size of that crack is about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. That is not a spider crack. Spider cracking is something that happens in concrete during the drying process, and it is very thin lines. Typically, spider cracking is not something anybody needs to worry about. That is just the normal part of concrete. They say in our industry, there's 3 things that you can count on in life: death, taxes, and cracks in concrete, and spider cracking is fairly normal. Cracking like this would be a structural crack. This is not normal, not something that you can expect to see on a job. And when this kind of stuff comes up, unfortunately, solutions typically aren't cheap. This particular community recognized that there were major issues. Unfortunately, they were in the middle of doing a complete roof repair on this section of the community. So all of the community had already been assessed. So ultimately, what they requested that we do is put together a proposal, reattach the new coping onto the beam, and they obviously fully acknowledged that, long term, this was a Band-Aid for a much larger issue. But they just asked us to put the coping back on, essentially covering it up because this was a project that they wanted to dive into next year. By no means do I condone Band-Aiding problems. Unfortunately, the board as well as the CAM fully understood, the extent of the problem. But fixing a crack like this is no small feat. That crack actually goes down into the wall of the pool as well as back into the decking. And in order to fully remedy this situation, we were talking about a complete renovation on the entire pool. These cracks were in all 4 corners of the pool area. Again, started in the deck, all the way down the wall, down into the pool. Clearly, there has been major movement of this shell. And because everybody here lives in Florida, everybody knows the amount of water that we get typically in our rainy season. Water is great. It helps our grass turn green and the trees look nice. But swimming pools, because they are a concrete shell buried in the ground, groundwater can play havoc on it. So letting things like cracks like this go unresolved ultimately will cause more issues on the job. Water is going to get into these cracks. Once water gets into concrete, it really begins to wreak havoc. It breaks down, deteriorates the concrete, and it's no longer structurally sound. So what could be repaired with crack staples, essentially large rebar staples that are countersunk into the concrete, if left undone for a long period of time, may turn into us needing to completely demolish that section of the pool back to the original structure, installing new structural rebar, and ultimately reshooting the pool shell. So, like I said, Diane, can you guys see my mouse when I trace on the picture?
Yes.
Okay, so let me go back here. So, these cracks here and this crack here, typically once the tile and everything is taken off, we can repair these if it's caught early enough with things like staples and waterproofing and anti-crack mesh and some really good products that we can use to repair these things. But if they're ignored, ultimately the concrete deteriorates and we have long-term issues. Here is some other cracking on another job we found. This one was actually settlement. You can see the crack up here at the top of the screen actually started in the deck. This was the decking itself settling on the outside, causing pressure on this wall and caused a stair step crack down this tile. You can see, especially down here at the bottom, that water has already been getting in there. This crust that you can see on the tile here is calcium. That's water coming through the backside of the tile, coming through the crack and the grout, and formulating calcium deposits on the tile. And we will talk more about calcium deposits later. This pool was a pool in the Bonita Bay community here in Bonita Springs. This pool had many structural cracks. The client had been hiring a leak detection over the last 3 to 5 years to repair various cracks throughout the pool. You can see this one here, the overall length of that crack was about 18 feet long in the bottom of that pool. And that was one of 6 or 7 cracks that were in this pool. When I spoke to the client initially, I told him my concerns in regards to the number of cracks in the pool. Even if we have shifting and settlement, that amount of cracks, something is majorly wrong in this job. But I told him, we really had no idea on what could be the cause until we got into it. So as we drained the pool and began our shell inspection on this, what we found is that the pool shell itself was actually shot too thin. The concrete itself was only 3 inches. Typical concrete shell on a residential pool, and I say typical because that's where everybody's base engineering is going to start. But that typical concrete shell is 6 inches thick. It's got 1 layer of 3/8 inch rebar in the center of that 6-inch concrete. So you have 3 inches above, 3 inches below. Should be plenty to hold up a pool, at least a residential pool. Commercial pools are a little bit different, and those will vary on size and if they're coastal or not, because additional structural improvements need to be made when you are on the coast versus when you are inland. But this particular pool had 3 inches of concrete. We had 3 inches of concrete on the top and a layer of rebar, and the rebar was resting directly on the dirt. The sad thing is, this client had been paying the same leak detection company over the last 3 to 5 years to continually repair these cracks over and over and over. And after they opened up the first crack, they would have noticed how thin the shell was. So ultimately, our remedy for this situation was to completely rebuild the floor of this pool. It was not structurally sound. He was going to continue to have cracks. And if we're going to put a new finish over the old floor, I have to make sure that our finish is going to last. And thankfully, it wasn't too much of a shock. the client and I went over worst case scenarios on the front end of the job. So he knew on the front end roughly what it was going to cost to redo the floor of this pool. Another common occurrence that we have out in the field, both residential and commercial, and I'll touch on the differences between the two, is grout and surface degradation. And the reason why I say there's differences between the two, when you're talking about a residential pool versus a commercial pool, the amount of bodies of water in the pool in a commercial pool versus a residential pool is significantly different. The usage of that body of water is going to be tenfold what any residential, and even more in some cases, over what a typical residential pool is going to produce. So you're going to have more wear and tear, and a lot of that has to do with the amount of chemicals that we pump in there. And because you're pumping in those chemicals, monitoring chemistry, et cetera, is extremely important, because when the chemistry gets off, you can have negative effects on any kind of cementitious or porcelain surface in the pool. Less so on the tiles themselves, more so in the areas with cement, because it will wear down over time. So let's kind of talk about the differences in things that we can see in grouts and finishes. So here again, you can see the calcium coming through the tile. This was actually an installation defect. What was causing all of this happens to be this grout joint here at the top of the tile. When the pool was originally constructed, there was a plastic expansion joint that is put between the tile and the concrete coping above it. That is in place because that concrete coping is attached to the concrete deck, and that is its own entity. It needs to be able to move, ebb, and flow as it needs to, independent of the wall of the pool. When this pool was remodeled, before we started our job here, they had had this pool remodeled, I believe, 4 years ago. The contractor removed that plastic expansion joint and installed grout in its place. Well, what we've just done is we have bonded our pool deck and coping to our pool wall. So now every bit of movement that happens on our deck is directly transferring into our tile line, and ultimately is causing the grout to crack. And actually, the fact that it's cracking down into it tells me that the tile is actually beginning to break away from the wall of the pool. The calcium coming through the front tells me that water is getting behind it, and it's pulling the calcium from the cement and depositing it on the tile itself, ultimately causing a failure of the installation, and why we then had to remodel it a second time after they had somebody else do it through 3 or 4 years prior. What we're looking here is surface etching, and deterioration of the finish. My guess is this particular homeowner probably had the same pool guy there for a long time, and this is where he was dumping the chemicals in the pool. This was on the shallow end of the pool. So that would be my guess. This was probably where the acid was going in. Acid is more dense than water, so it's going to sink. My recommendation for any service company is to pour the acid in front of a return jet in the deep end of the pool, somewhere not near a pool light. And I say somewhere not near a pool light because what you're seeing happen on the surface here can happen to the pool lights as well. Except you're going to get a nice stainless ring that will turn black and not look nice anymore. So here's more a swimming pool that was deteriorating. You can see This was after a pool shell inspection was completed, but we typically try and show all the major area wearing. The big circles and the small circles are where the pool deterioration has gotten to a point where it is beginning to delaminate. And delaminating means that the bottom surface of the pool is no longer adhered to the concrete shell. So it's essentially turning into a blister, and water is beginning to come through. And I've got some good photos and video of that we'll look at here in just a little bit. What you're looking at here is just normal wear and tear on a grout surface. There is no water passing over this surface. This is just one that is exposed to the elements here in Florida, but you can see we've got little pockets of wear here, here, just little pinholes. This is just normal wear and tear and age on grout. Things like this can be touched up with fresh grout. It's not going to take a major repair. When touching up with fresh grout, the grout that is in the joint should be completely removed. They have nice little nifty hand tools that can do this. For doing little repairs, like if I was just going to do a section like this, making little repairs like that is fine. If the whole tile surface looks like this, I would not recommend looking at regrouting. Your labor cost alone to regrout, because you need to remove the grout from the area first, you're better off just removing all the tile and replacing the tile with fresh grout. But if we're just talking about a little area like this, where we can just use our little hand scraper tool to scrape the grout out of the joint, to put fresh grout in there, by all means, let's do a small repair and take care of it and extend the life of the product. Same thing right here. You can see just little wearing over time, very, very small. Again, things like this can be touched up. Very small issue over, in the long run. However, though, if you are seeing this kind of stuff, hitting it on the front end, making sure that you're addressing these little things as they pop up will extend the life of the product. The less we can prevent water getting behind here, the better, because then once the water gets behind there, it's going to start breaking down our setting materials. All of this glass tile is set on a mesh back, which means there is glue between the mesh and the tile. And if you can get water behind that, you will eventually break down the glue from the mesh and the tile. And then it doesn't matter what is happening with your setting material behind it. The glue for the tile will fail. And ultimately, not a warranty. It's, again, just, grout and things like that wearing down over time. We have very acidic rain here in Florida from all the salty air. So, just take a look at, your different tile surfaces, etc. You can get inspections done on your pool, and little inspections like that will pay dividends in the long run, because you can address little repairs rather than big repairs. Okay, so diving into calcium deposits. Calcium is something that swimming pools need in terms of their water chemistry. Your pool technician should be adding that to the water and checking for the calcium levels regularly. Water likes to be in equilibrium, and likes to find balance. Calcium is one of those things that it needs to find balance. When a water body does not have the right amount of calcium, it will look for it. And we have lots of things in swimming pools that could supply that calcium if it's not being provided on the front end in the general maintenance of the pool. All of those things in the swimming pool, being anything made out of cement, is going to have calcium in it. And we want to prevent any kind of leaching from the water into the calcium, any of the cement in our grout, in our finish, in our concrete shell. Because once we start pulling the calcium out, that's when we start getting the deterioration and major, major problems following. So yeah, talking about formation of scale on surfaces versus and underlining imbalances. Imbalances meaning imbalances in the water chemistry itself, water saturation levels and leaching, heat and evaporation impact, and like I said, when you start seeing calcium nodules, etc., and what that really means and can mean in the long term. This is a chunk of calcium. This piece of calcium was in the bottom of somebody's swimming pool. This was just a free-flowing chunk. When you start seeing thick things like this showing up in the bottom of the pool, that is a major sign that your water chemistry is off. Calcium does not just form out of thin air. Things like this happen when the Langmuir saturation index is not in equilibrium. It will begin forming things like this. Those of you that are lucky enough to have commercial saltwater pools can see things like this happen when the alkalinity gets off in the swimming pool. You'll actually see some of the return lines that are nearest to your equipment pad will almost look like a snow machine where they are physically blowing flakes out into the pool. That happens when the salt generator goes through its reverse polarity process. It's a self-cleaning process that the systems will go through essentially to rid themselves of any kind of scale buildup, etc. But when there's major scale buildup on a cell from water chemistry and they clean, you'll actually see the returns start to blow almost what look like snowflakes. And then if you pick them up, they'll look like this. They'll be pointy, spiny, etc. Major problems. Other things that you can see when you get issues in your water chemistry. If you have things like spillways, etc., you can see the calcium beginning to build up around the spillway and actually stick to the exterior of the tile. Not just the grout, but it's actually sticking to the glass. This is not an installation problem. We had seen the areas that I had shown in previous slides where you actually saw the grout, the calcium coming through the grout. This is completely different. What we are seeing here is the water chemistry is so out of balance that the calcium is beginning to collect on the exterior of the surfaces itself. This is just the beginnings of it. I have seen pools where it is way worse. Ultimately, if the chemistry is left long-term out of balance to this extent, what you can see is swimmers will start cutting their feet on the floor because, like I said, this is just a little chunk we found, but those will begin to collect on the finish itself, and the finish will begin to feel like you're walking on an extremely coarse sandpaper. And you'll even feel that grit on your tile. If you feel that on your tile or your finishes at all, is a very good sign that you've got some chemistry issues and it's time to chat with the pool maintenance guy. But yeah, you can see here the calcium actually originates up here where the water begins to flow over a waterfall, meaning that we are aerating that water and evaporating as well, but the minerals are depositing as it's doing it down the side of the spillway there. Okay, so you can see in this photo here, this is a calcium nodule. This began as a little fissure in the surface, fissure meaning small crack in the surface. The water ultimately ended up getting behind the finish and causing a drip down the surface. This is a video of a shell inspection we did a couple of months ago. Let me just let this video play. You guys can kind of see what I'm going through. If you've got the ability to turn up your volume on your computer, I suggest turning up the volume now. Because what I'm trying to point out in this video is actually the sound that the surface makes as the hammer runs over it. And what we're looking at here is a major delamination in a pool. I was saying earlier when we were talking about dampness on the wall, that calcium is a really good sign that water's been getting behind the finish. And then even after the pool strain, if you see those damp spots like we have here on the floor, you have all the moisture collecting around the cracks in the floor, and then you have the moisture collecting behind the wall. So again, and now you can see the water begins to pour out. So I'll pause it really quick. The comment I just made there was about bonding agents. So this pool had been resurfaced, I would say probably about 5 years ago. They hired a fly-by-night contractor out of Naples, who is no longer in existence. The contractor skipped a very important step of the pool resurfacing process, which is using a bonding agent between your old finish and your new finish. What that bonding agent does is it provides a mechanical bond for our old and new finishes, something for that finish to grab onto. Well, because they didn't do that, that finish never fully adhered to the shell and began peeling away from the shell over time, ultimately forming little fissures, then water getting back in there and water, beginning to spread the delamination of this finish. Like I said, you could see that I popped that delamination spot like a blister, and the water just began to pour out. But again, this was a failure in workmanship. There's a lot of this. I suggest, when you're looking at who's going to resurface your pool, get a list of trade references. Make sure to advise your board members that, the cheapest is not always the best. A lot of times when people are cheap, they are not using the right materials. They will go to Lowe's and Home Depot and buy typical flooring setting materials or shower setting materials, and none of those are rated for installation on swimming pools. Those particular products do cost more. They're more labor intensive to install. If they're giving you a timeline on the installation that sounds too good to be true, I would definitely question them and question other bidders on the job and ask about timelines. Typically, it's a fair signal that if somebody's going to finish a whole lot faster than everybody else, they're not going to follow the particular steps. And some of those steps involve cure times on your materials too. So, making sure that you've got enough cure time during the startup of your new pool finish is imperative in the life of the finish. So anyway, just wanted to touch on that. You can see all the water that's pouring out from that finish. Yep, that was what I was saying earlier when we were talking about the damage on the wall. So same pool, just different angle here. You can see this right corner. This was one giant section that had begun delaminating even before our shell inspection. You could actually see behind the finish, and it just took one finger pulling on that to completely rip that entire chunk that's on the floor. Not even a hammer took that right off the wall. And you can see here, if there was a bonding agent down there, this color would actually be a dark gray, being our bonding agent, or there would have been a dark gray on the back of the plaster, but there was neither, which told me that they never put any of that in there. Texture changes on pool bottoms: rough versus smooth, surface etching, material breakdown, circulation dead zones, slip resistance, and degradation. And again, at the beginning of the presentation, I said we were going to kind of bounce around. A lot of these photos and things that I have are can be used in many different instances. So if we go back up to one of these photos I started with here, this one here showing major material degradation. This particular pool finish was about 15 or 16 years old. And so this kind of material wear on a pool finish that old is fairly common. Now, if we're seeing stuff like this and the finish is only a few years old, major red flag. Typically, it's on the person taking care of the pool, because you don't see wear like this from improper installation. Typically, when you see major wear, it's the service company not keeping that water balanced. Again, same thing here. This is just major wear. This is a long time of imbalance in that water, and you can even see it's changed the color in the bottom of the pool. I mean, it's just really wreaked havoc. And again, this pool is 15 years old. I've also seen 15-year-old swimming pools where the pool finish looks immaculate and didn't need to be resurfaced. But obviously, this one's been through a ringer and needed to be resurfaced. Yep. Here is a picture of a recent client down in Naples. She sent us this photo at night. You can actually see the blistering that is happening in this finish. This is full of water. All delamination in here. Right, even here you can actually see the crack where that little fissure has started and calcium has begun to pour out in these few areas. But I mean, you can see this pool looks like the surface of the moon. It is just in really terrible shape. And this was another one of those pools where ultimately when we got in there, the contractor before didn't use a bonding agent. So our new finish, which this was a fairly recently installed finish, didn't bond to the old finish. And the contractor claimed everything was fine and never came back to warranty anything. So we came in and resurfaced the pool. But here's another angle, same pool. You can see those blisters and calcium buildup here in the bottom in all of those blisters where water has gotten behind there. Even down in here, you can see some on the wall here. But if you're seeing stuff like this on your community pools, it is a major red flag. This is time to resurface. Letting this kind of stuff perpetuate long-term is going to cause major construction costs when you actually come to renovate. Because once the water gets back there, it's there. Then it's going to start doing more damage. Obviously we already recognize that it's there. But if this goes ignored for years, we're talking about major reconstruction, because typically that water is eventually going to make its way into the concrete shell and start breaking down our actual structure. Whereas the surface of the bottom of the pool is just applied like a stucco on the exterior of a home. This is more of a cosmetic, as well as a waterproofer. It helps keep the water in the pool. But, issues in the finish can be remedied typically with just a resurface or sometimes a patch. But once you get the major stuff like what's going in the bottom here, if that's left long-term, we're talking about major structural repairs. And nobody wants to be the bearer of bad news. Okay, so we've talked a lot about poor workmanship and chemistry. I'm going to dive into a little bit of chemistry. I'm not going to dive into a lot. There are classes that everybody can take if they would like to further their knowledge on chemistry. I have had a lot of education on chemistry, but there is a lot to teach. So by no means am I trying to make everybody an expert today, but there are some interesting things about just the feel of the water that can tell you about what's going on in the swimming pool. First and foremost, sticky versus silky water. Very interesting. Silky water usually feels soft, smooth, slippery on your skin. This is what pool water should feel like. It should feel silky. It should feel soft. It means the water's balanced. Chemicals like calcium are within range. Saltwater pools are going to feel especially soft and silky because beyond providing a sanitizer to the pool, we're actually creating a soft water, similar to a water softener on your house. Your saltwater pools are going to essentially put a water softener on your pool, as well as replace your typical chlorine dispenser with chlorine generation on site. And yes, there are other products. They're not widely used, at least in my area. Things like borates, and people may be familiar with borates. They offer that kind of stuff for laundry, etc. Borates are a great chemical to use in swimming pools. They help inhibit algae. They help maintain pH balance. There's all sorts of great benefits to using borates in your swimming pool. If you have questions about them, you should ask your service company if that's something that they offer. Typically, there is an additional cost to adding borates to the water, but long term, like I said, if the chemistry is maintained and kept in balance, it's going to save you money in the long run. Transversely, sticky water starts to feel tacky on your skin or heavy, or you feel like there's a film on your skin, can tell you that there is something going on with the chemistry in the water. It could be high total dissolved solids, could be high cyanuric acid, could be high calcium levels, could be poor pH or alkalinity, but it's just that feel. And it's interesting that just going and getting into the pool and it feeling different on your skin is that telltale sign. So if your owners are telling you, hey, my skin feels sticky when I'm getting out of the swimming pool, it's time to chat with your pool guy. Something's not right. Total dissolved solids is an interesting thing when it comes to swimming pool. My graphic here is just trying to explain what total dissolved solids are. Essentially, the spoon is full of sugar and your water is warmed. As the sugar is poured into the water and mixed, the sugar dissolves into the water, becoming transparent again, and you cannot tell that there is sugar in there, other than obviously a sweet taste. But as you continue to add sugar to the water, eventually that water will reach its saturation, its max saturation, which means that it will no longer dissolve anything else in that water. And what that can look like when it begins to happen: cloudy water, rough surfaces, things like calcium. If there's too much calcium in there and the water can't handle any more calcium, excuse me, it can start, beginning to be rough and things like that on the surface. The other thing that can happen with total dissolved solids is it will start messing up your chemistry. Excuse me. If we can't dissolve chlorine in the water, it is not going to be as efficient at killing algae. It can make the water feel sticky. Again, that could be because the chemicals that we're introducing into the water to counteract our pH and alkalinity are not dissolving entirely and being able to be brought into solution. And then obviously, things that will trickle down following that are going to be your overall water balance, your possibility to increase corrosion on anything that is down the line, meaning any of your pool equipment, rails, ladders, etc., that are down the line. Obviously, if your chemicals are out of balance, we can wreak some havoc on everything that's connected to that swimming pool. And then again, it makes the water harder to clear. Circulation and filtration. The circulation and filtration system on your pool are like the heart and lungs. Everybody loves the part that they can see and swim in. which means that a lot of times the things like the pumps and the filters, etc., typically are the sacrificial lamb, per se, because everybody wants to maintain what they can see, and nobody wants to go buy a new pump because it's not making the pool any prettier. They're really expensive, especially on commercial sides where we've got to do, 5 horsepower pumps on up. And they're just a pain, but they are the heart and lungs of our swimming pool. If we do not have good circulation, we are not going to have good dissolution of any of the chemicals that we put in there. The water is going to get cloudy, because it's not pulling the contaminants out of the water itself. We will begin getting dead spots like around here where you will not have proper circulation because maybe your filter is old and clogged and needs to have the grids replaced. Or if you're in an area with sand filters, maybe the sand needs to be changed out. Once you start affecting those flow rates, you're not going to get the circulation and flow that pool was originally engineered to have. And I can't stress how important that is from a building standpoint, because when we build swimming pools, there are many factors to take into place. One of them, and an important one, is your flow rate and your circulation rate, which is put together by the engineer. You provide your engineer the layout and the drawing of the pool. He's going to come back with your pipe sizing, your returns, etc., that are needed to achieve, and that means filter sizing, that are needed to achieve those flow rates. And those flow rates are needed to achieve proper water turnover, dead spot elimination, etc. So, when those filters don't get cleaned or taken care of, ultimately, it's only going to hurt you. So, make sure we're staying on top of that stuff. And I have seen, I would say the biggest sacrificial lamb that I have seen in the field is the actual pack units themselves, the fiberglass structures that the equipment is held within. People will let those just completely deteriorate and fall apart. Those are what is protecting your equipment. They are keeping out all the heavy rains or sprinkler heads, etc., from beating down on your equipment. So when those lids, etc., starts to break and fall apart, it's time to just replace. We're working with a couple of clients right now that are trying to figure out how to patch them. I can't tell you how much I strongly deter people from trying to patch that fiberglass. It's never going to look the way it did. It's never going to perform the way it did. If it's cracking and falling apart, it's time to get new lids. Or if the whole unit really is in bad shape, it's time to get a quote on actually replacing the entire pack unit, meaning that you're going to get an excavator in there. It's going to be hauled out. A new one will be plumbed in, new electric and everything, because we've seen everything from the pack units falling apart to the electrical sub panels on the outside, where the panel is so rusted that it is only a thin piece of rust keeping water from major electrical components. And unfortunately, those sub panels are right next to stored chemicals like acid and chlorine, so they're more likely to just get beat up. That acid and chlorine does gas off, and anything metallic within that area is going to rust and fall apart. So make sure you're looking at more than just, the pump and filter and the pack unit itself. Make sure you're looking at the electrical components, because I'm sorry, but if you've got an electrical panel that's rusting and falling apart and I'm out there bidding your job, I'm going to red tag your job and I'm going to notify the local building department that this pool needs to get shut down. Because if water gets into those electrical panels, we're talking about fires. And in those pool areas, you have flammable chemicals stored. And when you start getting chemical fires, we're talking about major problems. So just keep an eye on that stuff. Your pool guys should be notifying you as well. But, I'll tell you that pool guys can become snowblind to it, especially if they're there every day. Sometimes they tend not to say anything or just don't notice it anymore. So I would still take a peek at that stuff and make sure you're staying on top of it. Well, we talked about the surface issues and kind of gone over this photo. Root cause versus symptom repairs, and I feel like we've touched base on this as well. There's differences between major structural problems versus things like wearing and grout, chemistry issues, and and then obviously you have the issues of poor workmanship, etc. Questioning contractor recommendations when it's coming down to, remediation and repair. I always recommend on the commercial side getting second opinions, especially if you're presented with a big change order, after a pool's been drained. You can get civil engineers to come out and take a look. I know there's some civil engineers, at least in our area, that for about $750 will make a site visit. And then they will typically make a recommendation, and who knows, maybe that recommendation is right in line with what the pool builder is suggesting. And maybe it's not, but it's always good to get a second opinion. Budgeting for investigation versus repair, kind of referring to our initial photo where I was talking about the coping falling off. We did the temporary repair for the clients just to get them through the rest of the season so they can finish replacing all the roofs in the community. But we also presented them with a proposal on the overall cost to repair and remediate the major issues that they're having, and they're putting it on their docket for next year's budget. And again, short-term versus long-term fixes. You had that pool where the guy was stapling it every year for 5 years. It's just a waste of money. Staples, each staple, depending on where you're at and what your market is anywhere from $350 to $500 a foot, just because of the amount of work that's needed. If it's small cracking, stapling makes sense. If we've got major cracks, it might be time to look at a better solution. Yeah, it may sting a little bit presenting that to the board, but at least you're not dumping money on a wasted repair. And that pretty much wraps it up for my presentation. Covered a lot. Time to do some evaluation, and then if we've got time, shoot some questions.
Definitely. Yeah, let's run through this so we can open it up, because I know that Lindsay has some questions and we have some questions in the Q&A. So yeah, let's run through it. I'm going to enable chat so everybody can put their responses into the chat. If you want to participate, don't put them in Q&A, please. And yeah, let's go through it. Eddie, are you able to put it to the right? There you go.
Yep. All right.
I love the video in there too. Was that a video that I did?
No, that's one that I sent you though.
I'm like, right. I can't take credit. All right, go ahead. Oh, you want me to question one? What type of crack is most concerning structurally? Hairline, surface, wide diagonal, color variation. Put it into the chat. We're getting a lot in here. And everyone's paying attention. See? Okay. What's the answer, Eddie?
See. Wide diagonal crack. I mean, I feel like that's pretty obvious. Anytime you have a wide crack, it's a serious crack. Hairline cracks, etc., typically can be small repairs. We can do things like using anti-crack membrane, etc., to remedy, versus wide diagonal cracks typically indicate a much bigger issue and a more expensive repair.
I feel like we're going to need to add some crack jokes into the next presentation. Let me really quick, let me pause this. Let's get to the questions first, because the evaluation is, it's pretty generic. One of the questions that came in, can I get the PowerPoint email to me? I'll go over that. There are 6 leak identified on the pipes of the gutter grates of the pool. Once we identify where the leaks are, we close the gutter grates valve from the main tank, left the pool running with one pump, and the pool is not leaking. Does this confirm that the leaks are on the gutters?
I mean, based on what you're telling me, that sounds like a pretty solid yes. However, the question will end up being, has the water level dropped below the gutter, or is it still at the gutter level? Because that'll indicate two different types of possibility. If the water level has dropped below the gutter with the gutter off, I would recommend filling the water of the pool back up to where it still spills into the gutter with them off, and then see if you have water loss. If it does not experience water loss with the gutter off, then it is more likely a plumbing issue on the gutter line itself. But
Okay.
yeah, I would say
It's by the gutter grate.
What's that?
It's by the gutter grate.
Yeah, so it sounds like you are probably most likely experiencing a leak in the plumbing itself, not necessarily the actual seal to the gutter grate in the finish.
Okay.
That can always be confirmed with a pressure test inspection as well, where they plug off the entire line and put the whole line under pressure to check for a pressure drop.
Okay. Okay, we're gonna ask that you just go through this straight to your contact page. I think Lindsay
Okay.
has a question. I'm gonna put your contact information into the chat and then we will wrap this up. Lindsay?
Yeah, so just real quick, earlier you were showing pictures of the calcium buildup that was on glass tiles. And I know from experience that that's really difficult. I mean, can you clean that off? How difficult is it?
You have to be very careful when you're cleaning calcium deposits on glass tiles. You can use things like a pumice stone, but if the glass tile has an iridescent finish on the front, I wouldn't recommend using a pumice because that can scrape that iridescent sheen off the tile itself. You can do things like bead blasting or soda blasting to remove calcium deposits. Again, it really will depend on how bad it is. You can also use, there are some chemicals as well that will dissolve calcium. They sell it at your local pool store as like a tile cleaner, calcium remover. And those are going to have a mild acid in them. So again, with caution, not overloading it, because anything with acid in it, if you use too much, will eat the cement in the surface or the grout.
Gotcha.
Okay, thank you. Eddie, do me a favor. Yep, go all the way to the end. Again, everybody, I put the contact information for Eddie and his team into the chat. Eddie, real briefly, will you go over again your service areas? Because we always recommend to be one of the 3 bids. So everyone, if you're in this area, we highly recommend Eddie and his team at Azure.
So